My husband smiled when the K9 lunged toward our luggage. It wasn't a big smile. Grant Harper was too controlled for that. It was just a tiny upward pull at one corner of his mouth, the kind of expression most people would miss unless they had spent 18 years watching him charm investors, lie to colleagues, and look straight into my eyes while telling me I was imagining things. But I saw it. I saw the flicker of anticipation in his face, the pulse jumping in his jaw, the way his hand tightened around the handle of his carry-on as the German Shepherd moved closer to the conveyor belt. He thought I was about to be destroyed in front of everyone. He thought airport security was about to tear open my suitcase, find the locked metal case he had hidden inside it, and hand him the ending he'd been planning for months. Me in handcuffs, him grieving in public, and his mistress free to step into my life while I disappeared behind a steel door somewhere far from home. What Grant didn't know was that I had already changed the script. By the time that dog reached the belt, the locked case was no longer in my suitcase. It was in his mistress's bag. The first thing I noticed when we walked into the premium security line at O'Hare was the smell of roasted coffee and floor polish. Airports always smell like people trying to pretend they aren't afraid to leave their lives behind for a few days. It was 6:40 in the morning, and the terminal glowed with that cold, expensive light that makes everyone look either exhausted or dishonest. In Grant's case, it was both. I stood beside him holding a paper cup of vanilla latte, my black cashmere coat folded over one arm, and watched him glance at my suitcase for the 5th time in less than 2 minutes. "Relax," he said too casually. "We're running ahead of schedule." His voice was warm, almost playful. To anyone else, he looked like a successful husband taking his wife on a luxury getaway. At 49, Grant still knew how to wear concern like a custom suit. He had silver at his temples, broad shoulders, a polished executive smile, and the kind of easy confidence that made strangers trust him in elevators. It had made me trust him once, too. I took a slow sip of coffee and smiled back. "I'm perfectly relaxed." "Good." He leaned in and kissed my temple. "That's all I want this weekend, if. No stress, just you and me. You and me, right?" And apparently Layla Bennett, in a cream wool trench coat and $600 worth of highlights, standing 10 foot behind us, pretending she wasn't on the same flight. Layla lifted a hand in a bright little wave when our eyes met, then immediately looked embarrassed by her own boldness. She had perfected that expression over the last year. Half innocent, half flirtatious, all performance. At 31, she had mastered the art of looking expensive without ever appearing to try. Her blonde hair fell in glossy waves over one shoulder. Her nails were pale pink and immaculate. The cream leather weekender at her feet had a designer logo stamped so prominently across it, it might as well have been shouting. Grant had introduced her to me 2 years earlier at a company Christmas party as his new executive assistant. She'd shaken my hand with both of hers and told me how much she admired my work. 3 months later, she was sending Grant texts after midnight. 6 months after that, she was wearing earrings that cost more than my first car. And now she was flying to London on the same itinerary as the romantic trip my husband had booked to save our marriage. The lie would have been insulting if it hadn't been so dangerous. Grant had told me she needed to deliver confidential financial projections to a board member during our layover, before taking a separate return flight to Chicago. He said it with a straight face, as if encrypted email didn't exist, as if a billion-dollar pharmaceutical company depended on his mistress carrying paper documents across the Atlantic like it was 1987. At the time, I had smiled and told him I understood. I had not understood. I had calculated. "Go ahead and put your bag up first," Grant said, now resting a hand on the small of my back. "Then I'll put mine up behind it." There it was again, the urgency under the softness, the tiny pressure forward. He wanted my suitcase on that belt. He wanted it separated from the others, just enough to be clearly mine when the alarm went off. I let him guide me half a step, then lifted the handle of my suitcase myself. It was a sleek black Briggs and Riley carry-on, practical, understated, and until last night entirely unremarkable. I set it on the belt with careful ease, directly beside Grant's garment bag. Layla stepped up behind us and placed her cream leather weekender on the belt, too. She smelled like amber and orange blossom. Her eyes slid toward Grant for a second, searching his face for reassurance, then away again. Whatever role she thought she was playing in this little drama, she clearly believed she was on the winning side. That almost made me pity her. Almost. The line inched forward. Somewhere behind us, a toddler started crying. An overhead speaker called final boarding for a flight to Denver. A TSA agent waved an elderly couple through the scanner with the kind of tired politeness only airports and hospitals ever manage. Then the atmosphere shifted. A customs officer walked into our lane with a German shepherd at his side. The dog was lean and focused, black and tan fur gleaming beneath the fluorescent lights. It moved with controlled purpose, nose low, tail steady. The moment I saw it, I felt Grant go still beside me. Not visibly still. He wasn't sloppy enough for that, but I felt it in the way his body tightened, the way his breathing paused, the way excitement sharpened the air around him. Last night, around 2 o'clock in the morning, I had watched him slide out of bed and stand over my suitcase in the dark. I had kept my breathing even, my eyes barely open beneath lowered lashes, while he knelt on the bedroom rug and unzipped the inner lining. He used a utility blade to cut a clean slit in the fabric, then slid a small locked metal case into the frame of the luggage with careful, practiced hands. He smoothed the lining back into place, zipped the compartment, and patted the suitcase once like a man sealing a deal. Then he went back to bed and slept beautifully. What he didn't know was that I had gotten up 20 minutes later, removed the case, opened it in my home office, and learned exactly what kind of husband I had really married. The memory flickered through me now, sharp as cold water. "Evelyn," Grant's voice was light, affectionate. "You okay?" I turned to him with a pleasant smile. Of course. The K9 began working its way down the line, sniffing roller bags and briefcases, weaving between tired travelers and chrome stanchions. My suitcase disappeared into the X-ray tunnel. Grant's eyes followed it so intently I was surprised the officers didn't notice. I stepped through the body scanner, lifted my arms, and waited. No alarm. The machine remained silent. On the other side, I picked up my shoes and coat and watched the conveyor belt emerge. My suitcase rolled out first. The TSA officer glanced at the monitor, then at the bag, then waved it through without a second look. I reached for the handle and pulled it off the rollers. Beside me, Grant stopped breathing. It was subtle, but I saw it, the instant confusion, the flash of disbelief, the way all the blood seemed to leave his face before he forced it back under control. He stared at the bag in my hand as if he were looking at a ghost. The case was supposed to be inside it. The dog was supposed to alert. Security was supposed to pull me aside. That was the whole point. I met his eyes and smiled as if nothing in the world were wrong. Then the German shepherd walked right past me. It ignored Grant's garment bag. It ignored the agents ahead of us. It ignored the stroller parked near the wall and the pile of backpacks by the secondary screening table. It went straight to Layla's cream leather weekender and sat down hard beside it. The handler's expression changed instantly. Positive alert. Layla blinked. "Excuse me." Everything happened at once. 2 officers moved in from the adjacent lane. Another agent pulled the bag off the rollers and placed it on the inspection table. Layla gave a brittle laugh and looked at Grant. "There has to be some mistake," she said. "That's my bag." "Yes, ma'am," the officer replied. "Step to the side, please." Grant didn't move. He looked at Layla's bag the way a man looks at a burning building when he knows exactly what's inside. I leaned one shoulder against the metal divider and took another sip of my coffee. It had gone lukewarm, but the sweetness still cut through the metallic smell of airport air. Layla's mouth tightened. "Grant." He turned to her too slowly. That was when I saw it, the first crack in his composure. The first raw flash of fear he couldn't smooth away. He looked at the cream leather bag, then at me. And for one brief, glorious second, my husband understood that I had touched every piece on the board while he was busy congratulating himself on the checkmate. The officer unzipped Layla's bag and reached inside. Grant went pale on the spot. 3 months earlier, on a rainy Tuesday in October, I stood in my kitchen staring at a charge for $984 at a boutique hotel downtown and tried to decide whether I was still married to a liar or slowly becoming one of those women who invent betrayals because they can't bear ordinary disappointment. The rain tapped against the windows in soft, relentless bursts. My kitchen smelled like basil, garlic, and the tomato sauce I'd left simmering too long while I refreshed our banking app for the 4th time. The charge had appeared on our shared credit card statement at 4:12 p.m. I knew the exact time because I had been waiting for a client to join a Zoom call when the fraud alert popped up on my phone. The hotel wasn't one Grant used for work. It wasn't even in the part of Chicago where his company usually hosted conferences. It was intimate, expensive, and discreet. The kind of place people booked when they didn't want to be seen walking through a lobby. I heard the front door open and close, followed by the familiar thud of Grant's leather shoes in the hallway. He called. "You home?" I set my phone face down on the marble island and forced my shoulders to relax. In the kitchen, Grant walked in carrying the cold, wet smell of the city with him. He shrugged out of his navy overcoat, loosened his tie, and gave me the same smile that had once made me feel chosen. "Something smells amazing." "Chicken parmesan," I said. He came over and kissed my cheek. "You spoil me." The words were easy. Too easy. I watched him set his briefcase on a chair, roll up his sleeves, and pour himself sparkling water from the fridge as if nothing in the world had shifted. I picked up my phone and turned the screen toward him. "What's this charge?" He glanced down. Just one glance. Not enough for an innocent man trying to remember a transaction. Then he took a sip of water and frowned mildly, as if I had shown him a typo in a grocery list. "What charge?" "The Langford House. $984 this afternoon." Grant set the glass down with careful precision. "That's not possible. It's on the statement." He reached for the phone, studied it for 2 seconds, then handed it back. "That's strange." My pulse started ticking harder at the base of my throat. "So you didn't stay there?" "No." He gave a small laugh, almost affectionate. "Evelyn, I was in a budget review from noon until 5 o'clock. Ask anyone." "Then why is it on our card?" He leaned both palms against the island and looked at me with a kind of patient concern that made my skin tighten. "You probably clicked into a pending authorization from something else." "No, I didn't." "You've had a brutal month," he said softly. "You're exhausted, Ev. You're not thinking straight." There it was. At the time, it was just a sentence. A husband telling his overworked wife to slow down. I didn't know it would become the refrain of that winter, the thread he would weave through every room in our house until I could hear it even when he wasn't speaking. I laughed, but there wasn't much humor in it. "I'm perfectly capable of reading a credit card statement." "I know you are." He reached for my wrist and squeezed lightly. "I'm saying you've been under a lot of pressure. Maybe don't jump straight to a conspiracy because of one weird charge." The sauce behind me bubbled too hard. Somewhere in the living room, the dryer buzzed to signal the end of a cycle. I remember these details because the moment itself felt so normal that I nearly let it go. That was Grant's gift. He knew how to wrap cruelty inside reason. I took my hand back and turned off the stove. "Fine, then explain it when you can." "Of course." He kissed the top of my head. "And for the record, if I ever did book a boutique hotel, I'd have better taste." I smiled because he expected me to. Then I served dinner. That night, after he fell asleep, I checked the statement again. The charge was gone. Not pending, not reversed, gone. I sat on the edge of our bed in the dark with my phone in my hand, the screen lighting the room blue-white, and felt something cold slip under my ribs. I knew what I had seen. I had spent 20 years untangling corporate fraud, tracing hidden assets through shell accounts, and watching men in expensive suits swear under oath that numbers didn't mean what they plainly meant. I did not misread bank records. Still, over the next few weeks, Grant made me question things I had never questioned before. I would mention a dinner he promised we'd attend, and he'd blink at me and say, "We never had that conversation." I would leave my keys on the entry table and find them later in the downstairs powder room cabinet. I would ask why he changed his phone passcode after 16 years of using the same one, and he would sigh, rub his forehead, and say, "Ev, you're doing it again." Doing what again? Making him feel monitored, making everything into an interrogation, looking for hidden meaning where none existed. "You're exhausted," he would say. "You're not thinking straight." The phrase became his favorite instrument. He used it with a low, intimate gentleness that made it sound like concern instead of contempt. If I asked why he was suddenly spending 3 nights a week at client dinners, I wasn't thinking straight. If I pointed out that he had started showering the second he got home, I wasn't thinking straight. If I mentioned the perfume on his jacket, a warm floral scent that was not mine, he would take my face in his hands, kiss my forehead, and ask whether I wanted him to help me find a therapist. It should have enraged me. Instead, at first, it hollowed me out. I was 46, not 26. I had spent my adult life building a reputation for precision, discipline, and professional calm. I advised companies on internal corruption. I sat across from CFOs and compliance boards and told them where the bodies were buried in their books. I was not impulsive. I was not dramatic. But there is something uniquely destabilizing about living with someone who keeps nudging your reality half an inch to the left every day, and then smiling when you lose your footing. By early November, I was sleeping badly and checking things twice. I started taking screenshots of statements. I photographed where I left my keys. I wrote down conversations after they happened, not because I was building a case against my husband, not yet, but because I needed proof that my own memory still belonged to me. The thing that finally snapped me out of it wasn't romantic. It wasn't lipstick on a collar or a hotel selfie or a guilty text lighting up on his phone. It was a receipt in the pocket of his charcoal suit. I found it on a Sunday morning while sorting dry cleaning. Grant was in the shower. I reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a folded slip from Bellamy Jewelers on Oak Street. At the bottom was a charge for $14,600, one diamond bracelet, custom setting, gift-wrapped. I stared at the number until it blurred. My birthday had been in August. Our anniversary was in June. Christmas was still weeks away, and Grant had never once in his life spent $14,000 on me without first making a speech about fiscal responsibility. When he came downstairs toweling his hair, I was sitting at the breakfast nook with the receipt laid flat on the table between us. He stopped when he saw it. Not dramatically, just a tiny hitch in his stride. "What's that?" he asked. "You tell me." He glanced down and smiled in disbelief, as if I had pulled a rabbit out of his pocket. "Oh, that." He pulled out the chair across from me and sat down. "It's a corporate gift. One of our investors just closed a major deal. His wife had a birthday. Bellamy Gift Wraps Investor Presents now." It was last minute. I held his eyes. "Do you want to try that again?" Something hard flickered behind his smile, gone so fast I might have missed it if I weren't looking for it. Then he leaned back and crossed his arms. "What exactly are you accusing me of?" "I'm asking why you bought a $14,000 bracelet and hid the receipt in your suit. You weren't supposed to be going through my pockets." The deflection landed like a slap. I let the silence stretch. Rain ticked against the breakfast nook windows. Somewhere upstairs the shower fan was still running. Grant's jaw tightened. Then he gave me the look again, that soft, sorrowful look of a man married to someone unstable. "Evelyn," he said quietly, "I'm worried about you." I didn't answer. He exhaled and reached for my hand. I moved it before he could touch me. "I know your work has been intense," he continued. "I know you've been carrying too much, but this isn't healthy. You think I'm imagining a jewelry receipt too? I think you're spiraling." There it was again, not thinking straight, spiraling, exhausted, unwell. All carefully chosen words, each one polished smooth by repetition. He wanted me defensive. He wanted me explaining myself instead of examining him. So I stopped. I stood, folded the receipt, and slipped it into the pocket of my robe. "Dinner with your mother on Thursday, right?" Grant blinked, caught off guard by the pivot. "Yes." "Fine," I said. "Don't be late." I walked out of the kitchen before he could answer. That afternoon, while he watched football in the den and assumed the conversation was over, I sat in my office with the receipt under my desk lamp and typed Bellamy Jewelers into a search bar. Their site featured a private appointment service, custom bridal pieces, and a winter charity gala. I almost closed the page. Then I saw a photo from a fundraising event 3 weeks earlier. Grant stood near the back of the frame in a tuxedo, drink in hand, smiling down at a blonde woman in a black silk dress. Layla Bennett was wearing a diamond bracelet I had never seen before. By midnight, I wasn't looking at an affair anymore. I was looking at a cover-up. Once I saw the bracelet on Layla's wrist, I stopped asking whether Grant was cheating and started asking a much more useful question: how much of our life had become theater? The answer, as it turned out, was almost all of it. I spent the next 2 weeks doing what I should have done the moment that hotel charge vanished from our statement. I shut up, smiled, and started collecting evidence. Grant had spent the better part of a year trying to convince me I was too tired, too suspicious, too emotional to trust my own instincts. Fine. I let him believe it had worked. I let him believe his favorite line, "You're exhausted, Ev. You're not thinking straight," had finally sunk deep enough to keep me off balance. Meanwhile, I became very, very quiet. Grant interpreted silence as surrender. That was his first real mistake. I work in forensic compliance, which sounds dry until you understand what it actually means. My job is to look at numbers people are desperate to hide and ask them questions until they start bleeding. I've spent years tracing embezzlement through shell vendors, catching executives who used corporate expense accounts like private slush funds, and watching men with perfect teeth swear their books were clean while I held the printout that proved otherwise. Grant knew exactly what I did for a living. He just thought marriage had made me soft. So I approached him the way I would have approached any executive I suspected of fraud. No accusations, no grand confrontation, no righteous speeches. I started with patterns. Grant had always been careful with his devices, but suddenly he became absurdly careful. He started taking work calls in the garage. He angled his phone away from me at dinner. He changed the family cloud password and claimed IT had forced the update. His schedule also developed odd pockets of vagueness. 2-hour vendor lunches that stretched into 6, board prep meetings on days there were no board members in town, overnight strategy sessions at hotels close enough to drive home from, but apparently too important to leave. I built a timeline in a spreadsheet because I needed structure more than I needed sleep. On one tab, I listed his calendar claims. On another, I listed credit card charges, tollway records, car service receipts, and restaurant reservations. Then I cross-referenced them against public corporate filings, investor schedules, and conference dates for Halcyon Biotech, the pharmaceutical company where Grant had been climbing the executive ladder for the last 12 years. The inconsistencies appeared faster than I expected. One vendor dinner happened on a night the vendor's CEO was in Seattle, not Chicago. A late finance review coincided with a reservation for 2 at a Michelin-starred restaurant in River North. A board breakfast had been expensed to Halcyon as a compliance retreat, but the invoice included a spa service and a champagne add-on. The receipts were sloppy in the way arrogant people get sloppy when no one has challenged them in a while. Then the numbers started to get stranger. There were consulting payments routed to a company called Norel Advisory Group. Small enough at first to look harmless, $15,000 here, $22,000 there, always under the threshold that would trigger automatic internal review. But Norel didn't have a website, a staff page, or any visible business footprint. Its registered address belonged to a UPS store in Naperville. When I dug into state filings, I found a manager listed as Al Bennett. I stared at the screen for a long time. Lila wasn't just sleeping with my husband. She was tied to a shell vendor receiving money from his company. I pulled up Halcyon's vendor payment history through a source I'm not going to name because I'd like to keep my professional license. By the end of that night, I had 3 more entities linked to the same post office box, all receiving recurring payments approved by one executive sign-off, Grant Harper. My chest went cold. Affairs are humiliating. Fraud is something else. Fraud has structure. Fraud has appetite. Fraud means the person lying to your face over dinner isn't just selfish. He's running a parallel life with its own bookkeeping, its own contingencies, its own escape routes. It means the flowers on your kitchen island and the hand on your back and the murmured, "You okay, honey?" aren't just manipulative, they're operational. By the time Grant came home that Thursday night, I had enough to know he was siphoning money out of Halcyon through fake vendors, inflating project expenses, and redirecting funds through companies that either belonged to Layla or were being managed on her behalf. I didn't yet know how much money was missing, but it was already well beyond fair gift territory. We were in felony territory now. I was standing at the stove browning shallots when he walked in. He kissed my cheek, set down his keys, and said, "You look nice." I had changed into a cream sweater and gold hoops because I wanted to see if he'd mistake composure for ignorance. "Thanks," I said. "How was your day?" He loosened his tie. "Long finance is a circus." I nearly laughed. "Poor thing," I said instead. At dinner, he told me a story about a difficult board member and made me a second glass of wine. He asked whether I wanted to take a trip after Thanksgiving. Just the 2 of us, somewhere warm, somewhere quiet, somewhere we could reset. He used that word carefully, like he'd rehearsed it. Reset. As if the problem in our marriage was static, as if all we needed was ocean air and room service, and a week away from my tendency to notice things. Where? I asked. He cut into his salmon. Maybe London for a few days first, then the Maldives. I looked up. London. There's a board meeting there I can't move, he said. But after that we'd have 10 days to ourselves. To ourselves. There it was again. I took a sip of wine and watched him over the rim of the glass. That sounds expensive. He smiled. I can afford to spoil my wife. It was such a polished line, such a generous line, and I might have believed it once. But I knew too much now. I knew about Norel Advisory, I knew about the bracelet, I knew his late nights had accounting trails. The trip wasn't an apology. It was logistics. Who's going to the board meeting? I asked. Just me and a few finance people. Layla. His knife paused for half a second against the plate. Probably. She handles a lot of the prep. Of course she did. I set down my fork. So your assistant is flying to London with us on our romantic reset. Grant gave me a tired smile, the kind men reserve for women they want to make feel unreasonable. She'll be on the first leg, yes. Then she'll handle a handoff and fly back. It's not a vacation for her. I let a beat pass. Seems awkward. Only if you make it awkward. He said it lightly, but the edge underneath was unmistakable. Then he softened his voice. Ev, I'm trying here. I'm trying to fix things between us. There was something almost impressive about the way he could weaponize tenderness. He had learned that anger made me sharper, but concern made me hesitate. Concern made me wonder whether I was becoming one of those women who destroy their own peace because they refuse to let go of a suspicion. He'd been working that angle for months. Only now it wasn't working. Because when he said fix things between us, all I heard was move the problem out of the country. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I looked down at my plate, moved a piece of salmon through the lemon butter, and thought about international airports, about customs checkpoints and foreign jurisdictions, and how easy it would be to trap someone in transit if you wanted maximum confusion and minimum control. A wife carrying contraband through a connecting airport. A husband with a polished public image. An assistant ready to confirm that the wife had been acting erratic for months. I felt the shape of the plan before I saw the details. Grant watched me carefully. Say something. I lifted my gaze. I'm thinking about whether I want to spend 10 days on an island with a man who keeps pretending I'm stupid. His expression changed just slightly. Not guilt, irritation. Then he reached across the table and covered my hand with his. You're not stupid. Good to know. You're hurt, he said softly, and tired and looking for patterns that aren't there. I almost pulled my hand away, but I forced myself to stay still. Patterns like your assistant wearing a $14,000 bracelet you bought. That got me a blank. Only one, but I saw it. Where did you hear that? He asked. I saw her. He leaned back in his chair and exhaled through his nose as if I were exhausting him. It wasn't for her. It was for a donor event auction. Lila tried it on at the fitting because she was helping coordinate. This is exactly what I mean. You take one image, one moment, and turn it into a whole narrative. I smiled at him then, a small, even smile. You're right, that does sound like me. Grant relaxed instantly. There it was again, mistake number 2. He heard surrender where there was only stillness. Over the next several days, I built out the rest of the financial picture. The money trail was worse than I thought. Grant had approved fake consulting contracts, padded reimbursement reports, and pushed funds through shell entities connected to Lila, and at least one offshore holding company. The total was already over $2 million, maybe more. I hadn't yet untangled all of it, but I knew enough to understand that this wasn't reckless spending or a fling with perks. It was a system, and systems require contingency plans. The trip to London was in 11 days. I told Dana Reed, my oldest friend and one of the only people on earth who knew the difference between my calm face and my calm face when I was about to dismantle someone, just enough to keep me anchored. We met for coffee in a quiet hotel lounge near her office. Dana was a trauma nurse with a dry sense of humor and a zero-tolerance policy for male nonsense. She listened without interrupting, her fingers wrapped around a cappuccino mug, her dark curls pinned up in the loose, practical way women in impossible jobs wear their hair. So let me get this straight, she said when I finished. Your husband is cheating on you with his assistant, stealing from his company, and now wants to take you overseas. Yes. And he spent months trying to make you think you're unstable. Yes. Dana sat back and stared at me for a long moment. Evelyn, I need you to hear how bad that sounds when someone else says it out loud. I do hear it. No, I mean really hear it. She lowered her voice. This isn't just cheating. This is set-up behavior. I looked at the foam collapsing in my untouched lotta. I know. She studied me. What are you going to do? I thought about the shell companies, about Grant's carefully edited concern, about Layla's bracelet catching the ballroom lights while my husband smiled at her as if he'd already traded in his life for a shinier version. Then I thought about airport customs and the very specific terror on Grant's face if his plan ever boomeranged back toward him. I'm going to let him make his move, I said. Dana's eyes narrowed. That sounds like the kind of sentence people say right before they end up on Dateline. I smiled despite myself. I'm not going to do anything reckless. That is not a reassuring smile. I know what I'm doing. Do you? I held her gaze. Yes. The truth was by then I did. I no longer believed Grant wanted a romantic reset. I no longer believed the trip was about repairing anything. I believed he needed me somewhere unfamiliar, controllable, and far enough from home that a single discovery in my luggage could destroy me before I understood what was happening. So I made a decision. I would give him the opportunity. I would pack exactly the suitcase he expected me to pack. I would leave it where he could reach it. I would act wounded, distracted, exhausted, everything he'd spent months insisting I was. And if Grant wanted to use my luggage to bury me, I was going to let him. I just needed to see what he was desperate enough to hide inside it. The night before our flight, I packed exactly the version of myself Grant expected. I moved slowly through our bedroom, folding silk blouses and neutral cashmere into my carry-on with the distracted care of a woman trying to save a marriage she no longer understood. I set out the passport holder he bought me for our 10th anniversary, the one embossed with my initials in gold. I packed the pearl earrings my mother gave me when I turned 40. I even placed the little bottle of lavender sleep spray in the outer pocket because Grant knew I used it when I traveled. Every choice mattered. Every detail was bait. Grant watched me from the doorway while loosening his tie. You're overpacking, he said. I glanced up and smiled faintly. It's Europe in November. I like options. He stepped into the room and set his briefcase on the bench at the foot of our bed. We're only in London one night and then the Maldives, I said, assuming paradise still requires sweaters on the way there. He laughed, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. That's my girl. My girl. I used to love that phrase. Early in our marriage, it made me feel chosen, claimed in the safe and intimate sense of the word. Over time, I realized Grant used it most often when he wanted me agreeable. My girl right before he redirected a conversation. My girl right before he dismissed a concern. My girl right before he patted my hand and explained reality back to me in smaller words. I zipped the inner compartment of the suitcase and rested both hands on the handle. What time are we leaving tomorrow? Car gets here at 6 o'clock. He crossed the room and kissed my forehead. Try to get some sleep tonight, okay? You've looked worn out all week. There it was. I turned my face slightly, so his lips brushed my hair instead of my skin. I'll be fine. You say that. His hand lingered at my waist. But you've been somewhere else lately. The irony of a man planning to destroy me asking where my mind had been almost made me laugh. Instead, I let my shoulders sag the way he seemed to want them to. I'm tired, Grant. That's all. His expression softened in immediate relief. He thought fatigue was surrender. He thought if I looked worn down enough, it meant his months of pressure had finally done their work. He squeezed my shoulder once. Get some rest. I have a few emails to send. I watched him leave the room, then looked at the suitcase sitting by the dresser in a square of warm lamplight. Black hard-shell frame, tan leather handle, clean interior, a stage waiting for the final prop. I brushed my fingertips over the zipper and went to wash my face. By 11:30, the house had gone quiet. The November wind rattled lightly against the bedroom windows. Grant slept on his back, one arm thrown above his head, breathing with the deep, careless rhythm of a man convinced tomorrow belongs to him. I lay beside him in the dark wearing a silk sleep set and a pulse that refused to settle. The digital clock on my nightstand glowed 1:57, then 2:03, then 2:07. At 2:11, Grant moved. I kept my breathing slow and even, eyes closed beneath lowered lashes. The mattress shifted as he slid out of bed. I heard the soft pat of his feet against the rug, then the almost silent click of the bathroom door opening. A second later, the room filled with a thin blade of light from the hallway instead. Not the bathroom then, the suitcase. He stood there for a moment listening. I let my mouth fall slightly open the way it does when I'm truly asleep. My right hand remained loose against the sheet. My heartbeat thudded so hard I was certain he could hear it. Grant knelt beside the suitcase. Even in the dim light from the hallway, I could make out the shape of him opening the front compartment with slow, precise movements. Metal whispered softly against metal. Then came a sound I had not expected but recognized instantly once I heard it, the delicate scrape of a utility blade sliding through fabric. He was cutting into the suitcase lining. I felt a strange stillness settle over me. Not fear, not exactly. It was something colder and cleaner than fear, the emotional equivalent of glass. Months of suspicion, humiliation, and doubt narrowed into a single undeniable fact. In the dark, my husband was not improvising. He had done something like this before, or at least rehearsed it enough in his head that his hands moved without hesitation. The slicing stopped. I heard a soft metallic weight being eased into place. Then the zipper closed. Another pause. The rustle of fabric as he stood. He remained beside the bed for several seconds, and I knew he was looking at me, checking for any sign that I'd woken up. I gave him none. At last, he slipped back under the covers, warm and familiar and monstrous. A few minutes later, his breathing deepened again. I waited 20 more. Then I sat up. The room smelled faintly of cedar from Grant's cologne and lavender from the spray I'd used on the pillows earlier for authenticity. My hands were steady as I carried the suitcase into my home office down the hall and locked the door behind me. Under the desk lamp, the damage was easy to find. Grant had cut a neat slit into the inner lining near the frame seam, then smoothed the fabric back into place so it would disappear at a glance. I peeled it back carefully and reached inside. My fingers closed around cold metal. The case was smaller than I expected, about the size of a hardback novel, matte gunmetal gray, with a biometric latch plate and a backup key slot. Heavy for its size. Purposefully anonymous. No logo, no label. Just a sealed object hidden inside my luggage by the man I had shared a bed with for nearly 2 decades. I set it on the desk and stared at it for a moment. Then I opened a drawer, took out a compact toolkit I usually reserved for computer hardware, and got to work. People like Grant mistake calm women for passive women. They assume composure means softness, that if you don't raise your voice, you must not know how to break things open. What they never understand is that some of us learn to stay quiet because it lets us hear the machinery underneath the lie. The biometric latch would have required a registered fingerprint, but the backup key slot was more old-fashioned than he probably realized. I used a thin tension wrench, 2 picks, and the same patience I once used to crack open a locked filing cabinet during a fraud investigation in St. Louis. It took 12 minutes. When the latch clicked, the sound was so small it almost felt insulting. I lifted the lid. Inside were 2 items. The first was a vacuum-sealed pouch containing several smaller packets of white powder, each professionally wrapped and labeled with a chemical shorthand I didn't recognize, but didn't need to. It was either narcotics or something close enough to narcotics to ruin a life before anyone sorted out the details. The second item was a slim black flash drive. I sat very still. The room around me narrowed to the lamp glow, the ticking of the wall clock, and the open case on my desk. My mouth had gone dry. I reached for the drive first because I needed to understand the shape of the trap before I decided how to survive it. My laptop hummed to life. The drive mounted almost immediately. What I found on it was so methodical, so cruelly complete, that for one wild second I had to press my palm flat against the desk to keep from standing up and screaming. There were spreadsheets, dozens of them, showing transfers from halcyon accounts into shell vendors I had already identified, along with internal memos, forged authorization trails, and expense approvals bearing digital signatures that looked very much like mine. My name appeared on draft consulting agreements I had never seen. There were copied email chains designed to suggest I had advised Grant privately on moving money off book for tax strategy. There was even a scanned note in a font meant to imitate my handwriting discussing temporary asset concealment. Grant wasn't just planning to get me detained at an airport. He was planning to hand investigators a complete narrative in which I was the architect. The contraband would make me dangerous. The flash drive would make me guilty. And Grant, the grieving husband of a forensic consultant who had apparently cracked under pressure, would become the man left behind to answer questions with wounded dignity while keeping the money. I closed my eyes. Not because I was overwhelmed, though I was. Not because I needed a moment, though I did. I closed them because anger, if you let it come too early, can make you clumsy. And I could not afford clumsy. When I opened them again, I copied everything from the drive to an encrypted external backup, then to a secure cloud folder under a name Grant would never think to search. After that, I photographed the contents of the case, the slit in the suitcase lining, and the case itself from every angle. I sent a time-stamped package of evidence to an email account only Dana knew existed. In the subject line, I wrote one sentence: "If anything happens to me, open this immediately." Then I sat back and thought, calling the police right then would have been emotionally satisfying and strategically foolish. Grant would deny everything. He'd claim he had no idea where the case came from, that I'd been unstable for months, that the drive was part of some obsessive private project of mine. He had already spent too long laying that groundwork. Maybe I would still win eventually, but only after he had time to move assets, warn Layla, and destroy anything I hadn't found yet. No, if I wanted the truth to survive him, I needed him surprised. I looked at the locked case again, then at my reflection in the dark office window. 46 years old, barefoot, silk pajamas, a marriage collapsing in silence around me, and suddenly, very clearly, I knew what I was going to do. Layla had insisted on joining us at the airport hotel before the flight, because, according to Grant, her morning briefing materials required an early handoff. That meant there would be luggage clustered in the same suite, the same car service, the same premium check-in lane. Grant had chosen proximity because he thought it gave him control. What it actually gave me was access. By dawn, I had resealed the case, repaired the suitcase lining well enough to survive a quick inspection, and repacked everything exactly as Grant expected to find it. Then I tucked the metal case into a garment sleeve inside my closet and lay back down beside my sleeping husband. At 5:30, my alarm went off. Grant stretched, smiled, and kissed my shoulder. "Morning, beautiful." I smiled back. By the time we reached the airport, the locked case was no longer in my suitcase. It was waiting in Layla Bennett's cream leather weekender. And as the TSA officer reached for the hidden compartment in her bag, Grant made the smallest sound I had ever heard from a man watching his future die. The first thing Layla did when the TSA officer unzipped her bag was laugh. It wasn't a genuine laugh. It was the thin, brittle sound people make when they're still trying to force a situation back into something manageable. She pressed one manicured hand to her chest and looked around as if she expected the room to agree that this was all absurd, some little mix-up that would be fixed with an apology and a smile. "There has to be some mistake," she said. "That bag has been with me the whole time." The officer didn't look up. "Step back, ma'am." Grant moved then, one step forward, then a stop so abrupt it looked painful. He caught himself mid-motion as if his body had started to obey a panic his face was still trying to deny. A second agent shifted subtly to block his line to the table. I stood a few feet away with my coat draped over one arm and my coffee cooling in my hand, and I watched my husband try to calculate whether involvement or distance would save him faster. The answer I could see from his eyes was neither. The officer reached into the side compartment of Layla's weekender and frowned. "Sir, I'm going to need another table." Layla's head snapped toward him. "Why?" He didn't answer. He lifted out the case with both hands, matte gray and heavy, its edges catching the fluorescent light. Grant's face emptied. Not pale, not tightened, emptied. Every practiced expression he'd ever worn, charm, concern, mild amusement, patient disappointment, fell away at once, leaving something naked and ugly underneath. He knew that case. He knew exactly how it had gotten there. And for one disorienting second, he looked like a man seeing the laws of physics fail in public. Layla looked from the case to Grant and back again. "What is that?" No one answered her. The officer set the case on the inspection table. Another agent stepped beside him, gloved hands already reaching for a testing kit. "Who packed this bag?" he asked. "I did," Layla said quickly. "I mean, yes, me, but I don't know what that is." "I've never seen that in my life." "Have you been separated from your luggage at any point this morning?" "No." "Then, too fast." "Well, I mean, maybe at the hotel for a second, but not really." "Grant." She said his name the way someone says doctor after a car crash, as if authority itself might stop the bleeding. Grant finally found his voice. "Officer, there must be some kind of misunderstanding. We're all traveling together. Maybe the bag was mishandled at check-in." "We haven't checked the bag in, sir," the agent said flatly. "It came through this lane." Grant swallowed. That, more than anything, nearly undid me. Not the case, not the unraveling. That swallow. Because it was so ordinary, so human. The involuntary reflex of a man whose throat had suddenly gone dry. After months of being studied, managed, and quietly erased, I was watching him experience the simplest possible consequence, fear in his own body. Layla's eyes widened as the first officer examined the lock. "Grant, say something." He didn't look at her. That was when she understood she was alone. It happened visibly. Her posture changed first, then her mouth. The entitled confidence slid off her face in strips, leaving behind a much younger woman than the one who had smirked across boardroom dinners and charity galas. 31 suddenly looked like 21. She took a step toward him, but the second agent raised a hand. "Stay where you are, ma'am." "Grant," she said again, softer now. "What is happening?" I set my coffee on the stainless counter beside me and slipped my hands into the pockets of my coat so no one would see how cold they had become. This was the dangerous part, not emotionally, but procedurally. A public collapse is only satisfying if it lands on the truth. One wrong sentence, one impulsive flourish, and Grant would pivot back into victimhood. He'd done it his whole life. The officer turned to Layla. "Do you have a key or code for this case?" "No." "Do you know what's inside it?" "No." "Did anyone else have access to your bag?" She looked straight at Grant. The silence that followed was the ugliest thing I had ever heard. The officer noticed it too. His gaze shifted between them, taking in the expensive coat, the identical boarding groups, the husband who looked sick, the assistant who looked betrayed, and me, the wife, standing just far enough away to make the geometry of the whole scene impossible to ignore. "Ma'am," he said to me, "are you traveling with these two?" Grant turned toward me, so sharply his shoulder brushed the metal divider. I met the officer's eyes. "Yes." "Name?" "Evelyn Harper." "Relationship to the other passengers?" I let the beat land before answering. "Grant Harper is my husband. Layla Bennett is his executive assistant." It was the cleanest sentence I've ever spoken. Layla flinched as if I'd slapped her. Grant recovered first. Of course he did. He dragged a hand over his face, straightened, and summoned that low, strained sincerity he used when he wanted a room to trust him. "My wife and I are on a personal trip," he said. "Miss Bennett works for me. She happened to be on the same flight for business. I don't know what that case is, but my wife has been under a lot of stress lately," and he stopped. Not because of me, because a man in a dark security blazer had just stepped into the lane from the far end of the checkpoint, scanned the scene once, and changed direction toward us. Marcus Reed was 6 feet 2 inches, broad-shouldered, and built like someone who had spent years being underestimated by people with office jobs. He worked airport security investigations on the federal side now, but he still carried himself like the military police officer he used to be, economical, watchful, impossible to rattle. He was also married to Dana, which meant he had seen me at enough dinners and hospital fundraisers to know exactly how I looked when I was lying, and exactly how I looked when I was furious. Right now, I wasn't either. "Morning," Marcus said to the officers, showing his credentials. "What do we have?" "Positive K9 alert," one of them said. "Unidentified locked case recovered from the passenger's carry-on." Marcus's gaze moved to the table, then to Layla, then to Grant, and finally to me. His expression didn't change much, but I saw the recognition settle in. "Mrs. Harper," he said. "Marcus." Grant looked from one of us to the other. "You know each other?" Marcus ignored him. "You all right?" "Yes," I said. At the moment, yes. The moment stretched. Marcus had always been smart enough to hear what wasn't being said. His eyes dropped briefly to the case, then came back to my face. Whatever he saw there made him go very still. "All right," he said to the agents, "continue your screening." The case was opened under controlled inspection a minute later. I won't pretend that was easy to watch. Even knowing exactly what was inside, even knowing it was no longer tied to my name, I felt my pulse slam against my ribs when the lid lifted. The vacuum-sealed packets came out first. Layla made a choking sound. Grant didn't move. Then the flash drive appeared in the foam lining beneath the packets, and I watched the exact second he understood the problem had just become terminal. The drugs were bad. The drive was fatal. Contraband might be explained away with luck, corruption, or a panicked lie. A digital trail was harder. A digital trail plus shell vendors, plus forged authorizations, plus a mistress with her fingerprints all over the vendor network. That was the kind of mess that kept people in federal buildings for years. "Sir," one of the agents said to Grant, "step back from the table. I haven't touched anything." "Step back anyway." Layla turned on him then finally, and all the glamour vanished. "Grant, what is that?" Her voice cracked on the last word. Tell them this isn't mine." He stared at her with open contempt. It was the first honest expression I had seen on his face in months. "I don't know what you packed," he said. The words hit her like a physical blow. "You can't be serious. I told you to handle your own luggage." "Oh my God." She shook her head, tears gathering too fast. "Oh my God, Grant." There it was, the moment she understood she had never been his partner. She was just another container, another place to stash risk until it became inconvenient. Marcus looked at the drive, then at me. "Mrs. Harper, do you know anything about this case?" Grant's head whipped toward me. I could feel him trying to predict me. Would I stay silent? Would I hedge? Would I play the careful wife and let the officials discover things in their own time? That was the version of me he had spent months engineering, the tired, hesitant woman who could be talked over, corrected, and slowly rewritten in front of strangers. He had built his entire future around her. I took my hands out of my coat pockets. "Yes," I said. Grant went completely still. Marcus's voice stayed even. "Go on." "That case was in my suitcase last night." The words landed like a dropped tray in a church. Layla stared at me. One of the agents looked up sharply. Grant made a small sound, half inhale, half warning, but I kept going. "I watched my husband hide it there around 2 o'clock in the morning," I said. "He cut into the lining and slid it inside the frame. I removed it after he fell asleep. I opened it in my home office. I copied the contents of the flash drive, photographed the case, photographed the damage to my suitcase, and sent the evidence to a secure account." Marcus didn't interrupt. He just held my gaze and listened. "The drive contains financial records tied to Halcyon Biotech," I said. "Shell vendors, false consulting agreements, forged approvals, and documents designed to frame me as the person moving money. Some of the vendors route through entities connected to Ms. Bennett." I looked at Layla then, and for the first time I saw something other than vanity in her face. Fear. I don't know how much she knows, but I know what my husband intended. Grant found his voice at last. "This is insane." "No," I said quietly. "It's organized." He took a step toward me, all polish gone now. "You expect anyone to believe I planted narcotics in my own wife's luggage? I expect them to believe exactly what your records show." "My records." He laughed, once, harsh and disbelieving. "You broke into a private drive, stole company information, and moved contraband into another passenger's bag. Do you hear yourself?" There it was, the pivot. The attempt to make me the reckless one, the unstable one, the one who had overreached. I almost admired the instinct. Marcus didn't. Mr. Harper stopped talking. Grant ignored him. "She's been paranoid for months. She's obsessed. She's gone through my phone, my office, my—" "You're exhausted," I said. He stopped. I don't think anyone else in that checkpoint understood why the words hit as hard as they did, but Grant did. He knew I was handing his own script back to him in pieces. I took one step closer, just enough that he had to hear me over the hum of the conveyor belt and the distant boarding announcements. "You're not thinking straight," I said. His face changed. Not rage this time, not fear either. Something worse. Recognition. The sick, helpless recognition of a man realizing the sentence he used to shrink me had just become evidence of the entire architecture behind him. Every time he'd said it. Every time he'd smiled and implied I was too tired, too emotional, too unstable to trust my own eyes. It was all standing in the open now, stripped of its tenderness, shown for what it really was, rehearsal. Layla started crying in earnest then. Not pretty crying, not movie crying, full-body mascara-streaking panic. Grant, please tell them I didn't know about any of this. He didn't even look at her. Agents separated them within minutes. Marcus requested secondary interviews and a digital hold. Halcyon's name triggered the right kind of interest in the right kind of office, especially once I gave them the vendor names I'd traced and the time-stamped evidence package I had already preserved. Grant tried twice to regain control, once by asking for his attorney, once by telling an agent I was having a mental health episode. Neither landed. Men like Grant spend so much time managing private rooms that they forget institutions can be harder to charm than wives. When they finally walked him away, he turned once and looked back at me. I had expected fury, maybe hatred, maybe a promise. What I saw instead was disbelief so profound it almost made him look young. Not innocent, never that, but young in the way powerful men sometimes do when the world stops agreeing to their version of it. He truly hadn't thought I would fight like this. Layla was taken in another direction, crying hard enough to shake. I didn't follow either of them with my eyes. I just stood there in the bright airport light, breathing in coffee, disinfectant, and the faint electrical smell of the scanner belts, and let the adrenaline drain out of me in slow, careful waves. Marcus came back after a while with a paper cup of water. "You okay?" he asked. I took the cup. "I will be." That was one hell of a morning. "Yes," I said. "It really was." He studied me for a moment. "Dana's going to kill me if I don't ask whether you need someone with you." A laugh escaped me before I could stop it. Small, shaky reel. "I might need a lot of things, but right now I need breakfast." "That I can help with." I looked past him at the huge airport windows where the first clean band of sunrise had started to break over the tarmac, turning the glass pale gold. Planes taxied in the distance. People hurried past us dragging roller bags and half-finished coffees, unaware that my marriage had just ended 20 feet from the C concourse scanner. And maybe that was the strangest part of all. The world didn't pause because your life cracked open. It kept boarding flights and steaming milk and calling Zone 3 to the gate. It kept moving, which meant you could move too. Grant had spent months trying to make me doubt my mind, my instincts, my own name inside my own life. He wanted me frightened, discredited, erased. Instead, he gave me the clearest view I'd ever had of him and of myself. I was not the woman he had been talking to in that kitchen all winter. I was not tired. I was not confused, and I was certainly not done. I canceled the London flight. I called my daughter before the news could reach her some other way. Then I walked out of O'Hare into the cold Chicago morning with my suitcase in one hand and my coat buttoned high against the wind, feeling lighter than I had in years. If you've ever had someone slowly try to rewrite your reality, if you've ever been told you were too emotional, too forgetful, too tired to trust what you know in your bones, I hope you remember this. Sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do to a manipulator is stay calm long enough to see the whole board. And if this story stayed with you, I'd love to hear from you. Leave a comment and tell me where you're watching from, or tell me whether you would have spotted Grant sooner than I did. We have many more stories like this to share. Stories about betrayal, survival, and the quiet moment someone finally takes their power back. So if you want to keep walking that road with us, subscribe and stay close. There's a lot more ahead.